Mrs. Rodriguez always said Karen would push too far one day, but no one expected it to end with a full-blown HOA mutiny, a financial scandal, and a dethroned queen running from the press, clutching her pink clipboard like a lifeline. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. I yanked it down, my eyes immediately locking onto the bold red print. Immediate HOA fee increase, $500 monthly violation, excessive vehicles on property. My jaw tightened as I read it again, just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. $500? For what? I didn't have to wonder long. I stepped out onto my porch, letting my gaze settle on my own damn driveway, where my 3 vehicles sat parked, neatly, legally, and fully within my property lines. There was my work truck, a sturdy white Ford F-250 that had seen its fair share of construction sites and electrical jobs. Next to it, my wife's blue Camry, the one she relied on for her grueling 12-hour ER shifts. And finally, parked closest to the garage, my son Ethan's Toyota Corolla, the used car we had gifted him for his 17th birthday just 2 months ago. 3 cars on my property in my driveway, and somehow, according to Karen Mitchell, that was an HOA crime. I exhaled sharply through my nose, gripping the paper tight enough to crinkle the edges. Right on cue, there she was. Karen, queen of the clipboard, was already out doing her daily patrol. She stood on the sidewalk across the street, her beady eyes locked onto my driveway like a predator waiting to pounce. Her signature pink clipboard was clutched against her chest, and her phone was raised, snapping photos. Again. This was the 3rd time this week I'd caught her photographing my driveway. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood tidy. This wasn't about preserving property values. This was about control. Karen had been running our HOA like her own personal kingdom for years, making up rules on a whim, ignoring complaints she didn't like, and fining homeowners for the most ridiculous things imaginable. Last month, she fined Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor, because her front yard had unauthorized vegetation, meaning she dared to grow tomatoes instead of decorative shrubs. A week later, she went after Mr. Chen, a high school science teacher, because his tires were half an inch over the edge of his driveway during a snowstorm. And now, she had set her sights on us. My fingers curled around the violation notice. I could already feel the irritation creeping up my spine. I didn't move from the porch, just stood there, arms crossed, watching her. She must have felt my stare because she paused mid-photo, her expression barely flickering before she quickly resumed tapping at her phone. It took everything in me not to march across the street and snatch that damn clipboard out of her hands. The front door creaked open behind me, and I heard the familiar shuffle of my son, Ethan, stepping outside. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, his hair still a mess from sleep. "Morning," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face before noticing the crumpled paper in my grip. "What's that?" I hesitated for a second. Ethan was a good kid, kept his grades up, worked a part-time job, never caused trouble. But I wasn't about to let him think this kind of nonsense was normal. I handed him the paper. "Apparently your car is a threat to the neighborhood." He blinked, scanning the notice. "Wait, seriously?" His eyebrows shot up, then he glanced over at his silver Corolla, a completely normal, perfectly fine car that wasn't bothering a damn soul. "Looks like Karen's bored again," he muttered, shaking his head. I let out a slow breath, watching as Karen finally, moved down the sidewalk, clipboard still in hand. "Yeah," I said, voice tight. "But this time, she's not getting away with it." I pulled out my phone and fired off a quick text. "Hey, remember that paperwork we talked about? It's time." Karen thought she could bully people into submission, thought she could fine us into compliance. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for years. Ethan handed the violation notice back to me, shaking his head. "So what now? We just pay up." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, not a chance." Karen had been pulling this nonsense for a long time, and I'd let it slide when it happened to my neighbors. But now it was personal. Ethan glanced over at the sidewalk. Karen had stopped a few houses down and was now snapping pictures of the Williams driveway where their teenage daughter's beat-up Nissan Sentra sat parked. No doubt another violation notice would be appearing on their door by noon. My son scowled. She just walks around taking pictures of people's houses all day? How is that even legal? Because no one stopped her, I said simply, tucking the notice into my back pocket. But that's about to change. Ethan sighed and glanced at his car again. Should I just park it down the street or something? I mean, if it gets her off our backs. No, I interrupted firmly. We're not hiding your car like we're doing something wrong. It's parked legally. It's not blocking anyone, and we're not giving her the satisfaction of thinking she can push us around. He nodded, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. All right. Guess I'll see how this plays out. He tossed his backpack into the front seat and climbed into his car, the old Corolla humming to life. I watched as he backed out of the driveway, his taillights disappearing around the corner on his way to school. I turned, heading inside, but not before one last glance at Karen, who had now moved on to another house, clipboard still clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. I shut the door behind me and walked straight to my office, where a folder I had been adding to for years sat waiting on my desk. Inside were copies of every violation notice I'd ever received, detailed records of selective enforcement, and screenshots of HOA emails Karen had sent, targeting specific homeowners. But the real ace up my sleeve? The property deeds. Over the last 5 years, I had been slowly, quietly, and strategically buying up homes in the neighborhood. Through different LLCs, each transaction separate enough to keep suspicion at bay, Karen thought she was dealing with just another homeowner. She had no idea that the man she was trying to find owned the majority of the neighborhood. I picked up my phone and sent another text. Let's go ahead and finalize the paperwork. We'll need everything ready by tonight's HOA meeting. It was time to remind Karen and the entire HOA exactly who they were messing with. I spent the next hour combing through my files, ensuring everything was in place. I wasn't just going to fight Karen, I was going to end her reign over this neighborhood. My lawyer, Mark Hensley, texted back within minutes. Mark, paperwork is ready. I'll bring the final documents to the meeting. You sure you want to do this all at once? I grinned. Oh, absolutely. She's had this coming for a long time. I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the stack of documents in front of me. Ownership records, proof of financial misconduct, complaints from at least 20 homeowners, all neatly organized and ready for what was about to happen. Outside, I heard my wife, Jessica, pull into the driveway. The moment she walked in, she saw the orange violation notice sitting on the kitchen counter and sighed. Oh, let me guess. Karen? Yep, I said, standing up. She's pulling the excessive vehicles card now. Jessica shook her head, tossing her keys into the bowl by the door. I swear that woman has nothing better to do. I saw her outside taking pictures again this morning. I gestured toward the office. Come take a look. I think tonight's meeting is going to be interesting. She followed me in, eyes widening as she saw the neatly stacked files. Wait, is this the receipts? I confirmed with a smirk. Every shady thing she's ever pulled, every ridiculous fine, every targeted homeowner, and, best of all, proof that I own the majority of this neighborhood. Jessica let out a low whistle. Wow, and she has no idea? Not a clue, I said, grabbing my briefcase, but she's about to find out. By the time I arrived at the community center, the parking lot was already full. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Neighbors sat packed into the rows of chairs, some whispering to each other, others looking irritated, probably already victims of Karen's latest round of fines. And then there was Karen, perched at the front of the room behind her podium, her pink clipboard and sparkly gavel sitting in front of her like they were symbols of royalty. Her husband, Tom, stood off to the side, handing out papers, probably some new, ridiculous rule proposal designed to make people's lives even more miserable. Karen tapped the mic. Let's begin. She clicked a button on the projector remote, and suddenly a blown-up photo of my driveway filled the screen. My truck, my wife's Camry, my son's Corolla, captured from multiple angles like they were suspects in a crime scene. Karen cleared her throat dramatically. As you can see, we have a growing problem of vehicle overcrowding in the neighborhood, she announced. Certain homeowners have been disregarding community guidelines, and it's causing disruptions to property values and overall aesthetics. A few of her loyal supporters, mostly the same people who never seemed to get fined, nodded in agreement. I remained completely calm, my fingers steepled as I waited. Karen flipped to the next slide, another photo of my driveway, this time zoomed in. This particular property has been in violation for weeks. Despite multiple warnings, the homeowner has refused to comply. I heard Mrs. Rodriguez scoff from the second row. Mr. Chen, sitting beside her, shook his head and scribbled something onto his notepad. I decided it was time. I stood up slowly, adjusting my jacket before taking a step forward. "Point of order, Madam President." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Thompson, you have not been recognized by the board." I smiled. Actually, under HOA bylaw section 73, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures. A flicker of unease crossed her face. I wasn't supposed to know that. The room fell silent as I strode toward the front, my briefcase in hand. "But before we vote," I continued smoothly, "I think it's important that the community understands the ownership structure of this HOA." Karen's fingers tightened around her clipboard. "What are you talking about?" I calmly set my briefcase down on the podium, clicked it open, and began pulling out neatly stacked documents. "As of last month," I said, laying the first set of deeds in front of her, "through my company, I have acquired 62% of the homes in this development." Karen's face went pale. Murmurs erupted across the room. People leaned forward, whispering to each other in shock. I continued, "Which means legally, I now have the majority vote in all HOA decisions." Karen's breath hitched. "And since I now control the HOA," I said, "the first order of business is to abolish this ridiculous vehicle rule." "You can't do that!" Karen shrieked, slamming a hand onto the podium. I turned to the crowd completely unfazed. "All in favor of removing Karen Mitchell as HOA president?" One by one, hands shot into the air. Karen's smugness vanished completely. She staggered back, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that refused to come. Her own husband, Tom, hesitated before slowly raising his hand. The room erupted. People cheered. Some even laughed. Karen looked like she might faint. She lunged for her gavel, gripping it so hard her knuckles turned white. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I smiled, picking up another file. "Actually," I said, "before you go, let's discuss the missing $50,000 from last year's pool renovation fees." Karen froze. A few gasps echoed through the room. People stared at her. I placed a bank statement onto the table. "Would you care to explain why HOA funds were transferred into an account registered under your maiden name?" Karen's knees nearly buckled. The news van I had invited pulled up outside just then, cameras ready. And that's when Karen knew. This wasn't just the end of the meeting. It was the end of her rule. Karen's hand trembled as she clutched her clipboard, her carefully crafted image of power and control slipping through her fingers. The room was eerily silent as neighbors leaned in, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning realization. I tapped the bank statement on the table, letting the weight of the evidence settle over her like a storm cloud. "So, Karen," I said, keeping my voice even, "would you like to explain how HOA renovation funds, money collected from your own neighbors, ended up in a private account under your maiden name?" Her mouth opened, then closed, her face a shade of ghastly white I had never seen before. The murmurs in the room grew louder. People began pulling out their phones, probably recording everything, texting their neighbors who couldn't make it to the meeting. Across the room, Mrs. Johnson, an elderly widow who had been fined $200 for having a flower pot too close to the walkway, was shaking her head. "You mean to tell me," she said, voice wavering but furious, "that all these years, while you were threatening to take away our homes over a little grass being too tall, you were stealing from us?" Karen's mask cracked. I don't have to answer these baseless accusations," she stammered. This is a smear campaign." I raised an eyebrow and pulled out another document. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a financial audit request I submitted 6 months ago when I noticed some discrepancies in the HOA's spending reports. And guess what I found? I flipped to the next page and read aloud. Unauthorized expenses totaling $72,460 over the last 4 years. Personal travel charges disguised as community outreach. Thousands of dollars spent on landscaping fees, all paid to her son's company. Karen visibly swayed, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. You're twisting things, she shrieked. You can't just... Oh, I can, I interrupted. And I did. And guess what, Karen? I'm not the only one who's seen these reports. I took the liberty of forwarding them to... I turned toward the back of the room where a woman in a navy suit stood up. Her cold, professional expression was enough to send Karen into full panic mode. This is Melissa Carter from the State HOA Regulatory Board, I continued. She's been very interested in how you've been handling our community's finances. Karen spun around as if looking for an escape route. Her husband, Tom, took one step away from her, as if physically distancing himself from the sinking ship. Melissa stepped forward, holding up her own folder. Mrs. Mitchell, she said in a voice that was sharp and final, as of this moment, you are under investigation for HOA financial misconduct, fraudulent use of community funds, and failure to disclose conflicts of interest. The room erupted. People shouted, clapped, someone whistled. Karen looked around wildly, as if searching for a single friendly face, but there were none left. You'll regret this, she hissed at me, her voice so low only I could hear. I'll make sure of it. I just smiled. Funny, I said, leaning in slightly. I was about to say the same thing to you. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down, fumbled to unlock the screen, and went even paler. I knew exactly what she was seeing. The news article was already going live. Breaking. Local HOA president accused of financial misconduct investigation underway. With a full breakdown of her crimes, a few juicy details from the financial reports, and, best of all, a photo of her measuring my grass at 3 a.m., I could hear neighbors gasping as they started scrolling on their own phones. Karen stumbled back, nearly knocking over the podium. I adjourn this meeting, she screeched. I laughed. Actually, I said, slowly folding my arms, under HOA bylaws, section 7.3, you need a majority vote to adjourn a meeting. I turned back to the crowd. All in favor of continuing this discussion without Karen? A wave of hands shot up. Karen let out a strangled noise, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the room. The second she stepped outside, a local news camera crew was waiting for her. Flashes went off, microphones extended. She froze like a deer in headlights. I leaned against the podium, watching as she fled to her car, news reporters chasing after her, and just like that, Karen was done. Karen resigned within 24 hours, sending a dramatic mass email claiming she was being unfairly attacked by people who didn't respect community values. No one cared. The state HOA board took over the investigation, and within a month, she was facing serious legal trouble. The $50,000 missing pool funds? Gone. The fraudulent landscaping fees? Her son's company was shut down for tax evasion. And the $72,460 in miscellaneous expenses? The court ordered her to repay every cent. But the best part? Karen moved out of the neighborhood. She sold her house at a loss, claiming she was moving to a more sophisticated community. A week later, one of the remaining HOA members texted me a picture. Karen's new house had a parking violation notice on her windshield. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my phone. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.